Alfred Adler devoted his life to studying the ache of inadequacy, the quiet belief that we are somehow lacking while others move through the world with a confidence we can't touch. This episode takes you into the psychological roots of that feeling, tracing how it forms, why it deepens, and how Adler's insights offer a path towards self-worth that doesn't rely on achievement or comparison. If you've lived with the sense of falling short, this is an exploration of how to finally loosen its hold and rebuild a gentler, more grounded relationship with yourself. Most people carry a private belief that they should be someone better, someone more disciplined, more talented, more certain. This belief often becomes so familiar that it feels like a fact of identity rather than a feeling. It shapes our internal monologue, our relationships, and even our aspirations. This sense of inadequacy becomes the silent script that runs beneath everything we do. We assume others have something we lack and that we are alone in this quiet self-doubt. Adler saw this feeling not as a flaw, but as an entry point into understanding human motivation. To him, inferiority wasn't a psychological defect. It was a universal experience, an emotional starting point that every person encounters. He believed humans are not defined by what happens to them, but by the meanings they assign to their experiences. As he wrote, meanings are not determined by situations, but we determine ourselves by the meanings we give to situations. This perspective shifts the ground beneath us. Our sense of not enough isn't a verdict, but an interpretation, one we learned and one we can unlearn. When we begin here with the understanding that inadequacy is both common and context-dependent, we can start to see our own struggles differently. Instead of assuming something is fundamentally broken inside us, Adler invites us to see the feeling as a message, a sign that we long to grow, to become, to move. And in this episode, we take the first step toward exploring how that transformation unfolds. The feeling of inadequacy isn't simply uncomfortable, it is architecturally significant. It shapes how we treat ourselves, how we pursue goals, and how we interpret the reactions of others. In a world that constantly measures and compares, the pressure intensifies. We're surrounded by curated images and polished narratives that present a version of life without hesitation or uncertainty. Caught in that contrast, our ordinary moments start to feel like evidence of personal failure rather than normal human experience. This theme matters because the belief of not enough affects the emotional ecosystem of our entire life. Someone who feels inadequate may overextend themselves, becoming the dependable one who never rests because rest feels like proof of laziness. Another person may shut down creatively, assuming their ideas lack value before they ever see daylight. Some people become perfectionists, believing only flawless performance can secure belonging. Others become avoidant, believing their presence brings nothing worth offering. Without understanding the psychology beneath it, the feeling becomes self-reinforcing. We assume the emotion is telling the truth instead of revealing how we've learned to see ourselves. Modern culture deepens this wound by rewarding image over substance and comparison over authenticity. Adler's framework gives us another way to look at it, a way that treats inadequacy not as a sentence, but as an invitation to understand the deeper layers of our motivation. This is why it matters, because until we examine the roots of not enough, we will keep living our lives around it. Adler understood that the feeling of inadequacy rarely comes from the present moment alone. It grows from comparisons real or imagined that we began forming long before we were conscious of them. As children, we compare ourselves to siblings, classmates, caregivers. We pick up cues about what earns approval and what brings rejection. Over time, these cues settle into narratives. I'm not as capable. I'm too sensitive. I'm behind. These stories harden, and the feeling of not enough becomes a lens rather than an event. Adler's brilliance lies in reframing this dynamic. The feeling of inferiority isn't the enemy, it's the spark. It pushes us to imagine better versions of ourselves, to stretch toward possibility, but only when it's understood. When it isn't, the same feeling becomes paralyzing. Instead of motivating growth, it fuels avoidance, anxiety, and a desperate search for external validation. He captured the inner conflict of this dynamic with a sharp insight. A lie would have no sense if the truth were not felt dangerous. The lie is the story we cling to, that we aren't enough, that we can't risk showing our real selves. The danger is the truth that we fear, that we are capable of far more responsibility, vulnerability, and authenticity than we currently allow. The feeling of inadequacy is the threshold between these two forces. Adler's insight is that we must examine not the feeling itself, but the meaning we attach to it. When not enough becomes a signal of who we are, it controls us. When it becomes a signal of where we can grow, it frees us. Applying Adler's insight to modern life requires paying attention to the subtle ways inadequacy shapes our behavior. Someone might always volunteer to help others because being needed feels safer than being truly known. Another person may take on impossible workloads because slowing down feels like exposure. Others hide inside humor, achievement, or silence, anything that keeps the deeper fear at arm's length. Adler's lens helps us recognize these patterns as compensations, protective strategies built around the belief of being insufficient. When we label them as flaws, we reinforce the very story we're trying to escape. But when we see them as protective adaptations, something softens. We can ask gentle questions. What am I protecting? What am I afraid others will see? What would happen if I didn't have to be impressive today? This understanding allows us to shift from reacting to choosing. Instead of performing, we participate. Instead of overextending, we show up honestly. Instead of hiding, we reveal small pieces of ourselves in safe places. Adler wasn't asking us to abandon the feeling of inadequacy. He was asking us to listen to it differently. In practical terms, this means noticing the tension between who we think we must be and who we actually are. The more we notice it, the less power it has. Modern life encourages us to curate, compete, and perfect. Adler's approach suggests a quieter, steadier path, to live not from deficiency but from direction, guided by the recognition that growth begins exactly where we feel small. The true turning point comes when we stop treating inadequacy as an inner defect and start seeing it as a human inheritance. Everyone carries insecurities, even those who appear confident. Recognizing this shared vulnerability loosens the grip of isolation that often intensifies the feeling of not enough. We stop believing we are uniquely flawed and begin seeing ourselves as part of a universal story. Adler emphasized that self-worth grows through active engagement with life, not through internal judgment. He believed that community, contribution, and connection are the antidotes to private feelings of deficiency. Instead of retreating inward, he encouraged us to reach outward to participate in life, even when we feel unready. This is where transformation begins. He captured this tension in the line, "It is easier to fight for one's principles than to live up to them. It is easier to talk about change than to practice it. Easier to cling to the idea of who we should be than to live authentically as who we are." But when we take even small steps toward participation and sharing honestly with a friend, trying something new, allowing ourselves to be imperfect in public, the old narrative begins to loosen. The feeling may still arise, but it no longer dictates our actions. This is the turning point, when inadequacy becomes not a verdict, but an invitation to show up anyway. Integration is where Adler's insights move from theory into lived experience. It's the stage where we stop battling the feeling of not enough and start learning from it. Instead of bracing against the emotion, we become curious about it. Instead of hiding from our vulnerabilities, we let them guide us toward growth. This requires patience, gentleness, and a willingness to sit with discomfort rather than flee from it. In practice, integration means remembering that inadequacy only has the power to define us if we allow it to. The feeling will come and go, sometimes softly, sometimes with force, but each time it appears, we can choose our response. We can ask, what belief is being activated? Whose voice is this, mine or someone else's? What small step can I take that aligns with who I want to become rather than who I fear I am? Integration also means learning to value effort over outcome, presence over performance, and honesty over image. It means showing up as a participant in our own lives rather than as a critic observing from the sidelines. It means choosing connection even when we feel unworthy of it. Slowly, the story of not enough loosens. It doesn't disappear, but it no longer governs. In its place grows a quieter belief that worthiness is not something we achieve, but something we practice through engagement, compassion, and presence. At the core of this exploration is a simple emotional truth. Inadequacy is universal, but the meaning we assign to it is personal. Everyone suffers privately. Everyone struggles with the fear of being seen too clearly. Everyone wrestles with the tension between who they are and who they believe they should be. This is not a mark of deficiency, it is the shared condition of being human. Adler reminds us that the stories we tell ourselves about inadequacy are often inherited, unverifiable, and painfully narrow. We forget that others appear confident only because we are not close enough to see their doubts. His line captures this beautifully. The only normal people are the ones you don't know very well. Behind the polished surface of every life is a person trying, failing, learning, and longing just like us. When we remember this, a kind of inner space opens. We can treat our feelings with more understanding and less judgment. We return to the opening conflict, this belief that we are not enough with a calmer perspective. The feeling becomes less like a verdict and more like weather, something that passes, something that returns, something that we can live through without defining ourselves by it. As we close, the invitation is simple. Allow yourself to be human. Allow yourself to be unfinished, in progress, still unfolding. The feeling of inadequacy may continue to surface, but it does not need to shape the architecture of your life. You can meet it without panic, without shame, and without believing it tells the whole truth about who you are. Let your worth be measured by your presence, not your performance, by your willingness to engage, not your ability to impress. Let the quieter parts of you breathe, and when the feeling of not enough returns, meet it with patience. It is not an enemy, but a reminder of your capacity to grow. If this gave you something to think about, subscribe for more videos like this, and thank you for watching.